Hey, Gocha here. It's been a while since my release, but in 4.0 something very special is happening. My best support, Sparkle, is not only able to be picked up for free, but is also receiving a gigantic buff to her kit. I still can't believe it, to be honest. Our first Harmony Novaflare does not disappoint, and I'll show you guys all why with a kit change overview, an estimation of how much these buffs boosted her team with Archer as an example, and more like any updates to her builds. So like and sub if this video helps you out, and let's begin. So beginning with her kit changes, we know what she does, but let's see what has changed. First off, a change everyone has been asking for, or should have been asking for, is a buff to her skill's crit damage duration. It is now 2 turns instead of 1.99. This means if your DPS has self-action advance, or you're pairing Sparkle with another action advancer like Sunday, no more buff loss. A fantastic first change to her kit. Now, that's the last thing that's getting changed by a single number. The rest of her kit got revamped quite substantially. Her talent used to offer a 6% damage buff that could stack up to 3 times, or 18% damage, which is pretty underwhelming. Her new talent now gives Sparkle an effect which makes enemies receive a 4% vulnerability effect, stacking up to 3 times still. So 12% vulnerability total. Again, this goes on Sparkle as an effect, so enemies entering in a new wave still get this vulnerability. And then her ult got a huge upgrade. 6 skill points instead of 4 is already very good. She should have always been the queen of SP, but 6 SP is a bit of a crazy number, no? Well, new Sparkle records overflow SP and will recover any overflow SP when possible at the end of an ally's turn. So not only do we get more skill points, we also don't have the previous problem of having sometimes too many skill points to effectively use her ultimate. Finally, since her ult used to boost her old talent's damage buff effect, it now buffs her new talent's damage taken effect. Not only that, the Cypher buff now lasts for 3 turns, something that used to be locked to E1 Sparkle. So during the ult, all enemies will have a 30% vulnerability effect on them, pretty crazy. And hey, even Sparkle's technique got a nice boost, now regenerating 20 energy at the start of combat for her. This works with energy regenerate and allows for a first turn ultimate on Sparkle, which means we get a huge amount of SP and our maximum buffing power right from the get-go. But the base kit buffs are not over, let's check out her traces. The basic giving extra energy is still here even with her much nicer SP economy, why not I guess, but now she gets additional energy when the character you skilled consumes SP. And this is only 1 energy even if they consume 2 SP like Archer. This is only really crazy for Sparksy who can use up to 20 SP in a turn and thus enable 2-turn ultimates on Sparkle, which was not possible before outside of quid pro quo Sunday Lycone setups. Now, it's also good with Archer, but needs external energy still for the 2-turn. And since her skills base duration now lasts 2 turns, her Artificial Flower Tracer is brand new. If an ally character consumes 3 or more skill points in a single turn, Sparkle's next use of skill will not consume skill points. This is like the Tengoku livestream planar set and works therefore on Archer and Sparksy obviously, but also Dill, as well as Zila in niche cases with kills, and technically also Bootel, but yeah. This makes her now never consume SP in her best teams and again is a buff to her new and already fantastic SP economy. Finally, her Nocturne Trace said no more Mono Quantum, this isn't version 1.1, and now she just straight up gives the maximum attack buff at all times to everyone. Sparkle solved discrimination. Furthermore, she got a little bonus, now giving 10% all-type res pen to the character she skills. And it isn't over just yet. She got changes to her Eidolons 1 and 2. The Cypher duration extension from her E1 was added to the base kit, which now means we get a new effect where Sparkle now gets a permanent 15% speed buff. This makes that hard goal of 200 speed much easier to hit by removing 6.5 average speed subsets needed, and a 200 speed Sparkle is a complete demon support. If not going for 200 speed, there are still wind and dance breakpoints that love the easier build requirements. And despite E2 already being pretty decent, they buffed the def ignore from 24% to 30% or a 3.8% DPS increase in a vacuum. So overall Sparkle went from generating 4 SP per ultimate on a 3-turn ult rotation to 6 SP per ult on a sometimes 2-turn rotation, which is easily achievable with her new best friend Sparksy. She can ult immediately on her first turn now too, which doesn't show in her kit as a new buff or anything, but in practice and calcs is fantastic for your team's first rotation. Her buffs went from a 1.99 turn crit damage buff every skill, 18 to 48% crit damage from her talent and ult, and 15 to 45% attack but with a not always possible condition, to a 2-turn crit damage buff with 10% all-type res pen, 12 to 30% vulnerability, and a permanent 45% attack on any team. She should have always had a strong trade-off for 50% advance forward, and now she does. Rest easy, Sparkle fans, the wait was worth it. For the buff comparison calculation, I will be using my old Archer simulation from his release. Inputting the better buffs of vulnerability and respen, as well as giving Archer more SP and therefore more arrows, resulted in a 40% DPS increase. That's on a DPS that is already very powerful and free. Now, this won't be the same number for everyone. Reason 1. Archer specifically gets a massive improvement from the SP economy, whereas some teams might not use that extra SP, it might just be comfier for them. Reason 2. Some teams could use the 2-turn buff duration from her skill now, which Archer isn't making use of since his turns are always synced with hers and he has no action advance. But in an RMC team with him, I guess it would be major. And reason 3. We don't see the increase from her OG attack percent buff to the permanent 45% because in this calculation I use 3 quantum. But anyways, did her build change? For relics, she still wants to use Cessados when not using any optimizing. It is still an 18 to 36% crit damage buff on top of everything else she provides. When optimizing for higher speed breakpoints, then darts can be used, but Eagle set can too. More on the speed in just a minute. And finally, 2-piece speed combos work if you have nothing else. Her planers are going to be either Lusaka or Vonwak. Lusaka is the general best choice, but Vonwak can be used if needing to act ahead of certain units in your team. Her main stats remain the same with crit damage chest, speed boots, defensive orb, and energy rope. And her stat goals are also unchanged with a decent amount of crit damage and then at least 160 speed. 168 is a further goal when using darts and or eagle, allowing in 1 to 2 ults depending on what you're using to hit 3 turns in cycle 0, and this works unlike Vonwak for wave 2, the more important wave. If you're rocking an E1 Sparkle, then you'll get an extra 15.15 speed permanently, allowing you to hit the 168 goal with only 153 speed pre-combat. But it also lets you remove dance or eagle and aim for 184 speed with the same breakpoint, letting you either run Sacerdos or a more damage-oriented Lightcone like her signature. E1 users could also try for 200. Now speaking of her signature, her best Lightcones will be between her signature, Sunday Lightcone, Bronya Lightcone, and Dance 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 of course, and some people may still opt for cogs with Archer. Her signature is the easy stat-stick choice and best for damage increase in an Elation team because the damage percent from all the other buffing cones literally do not work. It's also just always been good for damage increase, it just doesn't have utility. But bravo to the devs for semi-Novaflaring this cone if you were going to play Sparksy anyway. Then we have Sunday Light Cone whose energy and buffing is still powerful, even if the SP is much less impactful now. Again, do not use this cone with Sparksy, it is near useless. But with Archer and her new energy trace, with 10 arrows, you can nearly reach a 2-turn ultimate, hitting it with just 1 enemy attack. So no more quid pro quo needed in some cases. Bronya Light Cone is usable if you have nothing else, and the energy can also help with 2-turn ults if getting hit. And Dance is for more turns on Sparkle within cycle breakpoints, which in turn means more turns on your DPS. It is still as strong as ever, and it still works just great with the Elation path even if it won't advance AHA forward. Finally, Coggers can still be used if using occasional basics for 2-turn ults too, but if you plan around that, you know this already. So how good is the new Sparkle? Very. Any SP-intensive DPS will want her as their best support, even Dill again. Sorry Sunday, but you shouldn't have had this role in the first place. So for Archer, she was already very wanted for him, even if he was doing just fine on release with alternatives. With the buffs, the difference between her and other options is just way too much, and she is a must for this beautifully strong DPS. Luckily, they could both be picked up for free. Now, Sparksy is the most SP-intensive DPS at max power, and since most of her damage is Elation, she doesn't care for attack or damage buffs as much since Elation damage does not use these 2 stats at all. New Sparkle gives crit damage, vulnerability, respen, and so all of her buffs are up minus the attack percent, which is still okay for Sparksy. And Sparksy's kit is similar to Archer due to the amount of SP she can consume, where if you don't have SP or stuff up ready, then her turns are less impactful, meaning getting 2 times the turns from Bronya or Sunday isn't crazy. For non-SP intensive DPS, she remains a very powerful unit with the highest buff potential among herself, Bronya, and Sunday, even with Sunday using Danhung PT on the team. However, it's not a competition, and 100% advance forward can count as double damage if you have the resources and all the same buffs up, and they all have their use cases. Sparkle is for any SP issues and any DPS that can run attack boots fine, so DPS that don't need more turns that much for their kit and are fine with stronger turns instead. And with Dance and or Eagle, she offers plenty of actions even without 100% advance anyway. For example, if hitting the pseudo 200 speed with these things on her, you're getting 3 OP turns versus 4 decent turns in cycle 0 if explaining super simply. Sunday is great for any energy-based DPS like Aglaya, Saber, but also summon DPS like Jing Yuan and Aglaya again. His crit rate is comfy for building, and his doubling of turns can be very impactful at times. Whether he will beat Sparkle is up to your team and investment on some of these. And if speaking Eidolons, Sunday's Eidolons have always just been okay, and with Sparkle being back and then having buffs to both her E1 and already great E2, well, in vertical investment, she wins. Bronya is also just great in general with high buffs, has high speed tuning potential at E2, and you probably have her by now without doing any pulls. She lacks the 2-turn or higher quality of life of the other 2 advances though, unless you have her E6. But she does have the potential to advance forward Harmony units, which can be awesome in some setups and may see use with future releases. Finally, RMC can replace these 3 units in many cases, like if you have Cyrene for Aglaya, but with Elation MC coming eventually, I don't know how much we will end up using them, so I didn't want to compare. And it's not always about comparing, because the Spark Day combo is actually kinda back now. Before it had the problem of Sparkle's buff lasting 1.99 turns, but with 2 turns, better SP, and better buffs in general, the combo is actually kinda legit now. Now you can run 161 or higher like 169 if you care, Sparkle, 160 or 168 Sunday, base speed DPS, and they can act twice every time Spark Day can act with no base kit buff problems. For a DPS that wants to take a lot of turns, this is a pretty cool combo. It is also notably very potent for Finan as it has a huge amount of raw buffs, whilst also being really good for generating his next ultimate rotation if not using Cyrene. So let me know who you're going to use your buffed Sparkle with, and let me know how it goes on 4.0 release. Thank you for watching, thanks to my amazing YouTube members, and have a Guoba day.